The call came on a Tuesday night, and Margaret Calloway took it standing in her kitchen with a dish towel still in her hand and 3 children doing homework at the table behind her. Her husband Daniel's voice on the other end was calm, in the way that people are calm when they have already decided something and are only now informing you of it. And in the space of 4 minutes, he told her that he had been seeing someone else for 14 months, that he thought they should separate, and that he was sorry. Margaret said nothing for a long moment. She could hear Rosie arguing with Thomas about a crayon. She could hear Clara turning a page. She said, "Okay, Daniel, I'll talk to you tomorrow." She hung up. She finished drying the dish in her hand. She put it in the cabinet. Then she turned around, walked back to the cable, sat down beside Thomas, and helped him sound out the word elephant for the next 10 minutes, as though the floor of her life had not just opened beneath her feet. That was who Margaret Calloway was. She did not fall in front of her children. She saved that for later, alone, when the house was quiet and the tile floor of the bathroom was cold against her back, and she had exactly 10 minutes to come apart before she had to put herself back together again and keep going. Margaret was 41 years old and had spent the last 12 years building a life she believed in. She and Daniel had married young, she at 29, full of hope and certainty, and together they had built something that looked, from the outside, like exactly what a life was supposed to look like. A modest house on Elm Creek Road, with a maple tree in the front yard that turned extraordinary colors every October. 3 children who were healthy and spirited and entirely themselves. Clara was 10, serious and methodical, the kind of child who read instruction manuals for pleasure and could be trusted completely with a secret. Rosie was 7, a force of nature in sneakers, loud and fearless, and convinced that every problem had a creative solution if you were willing to think sideways. And Thomas was 4, round-cheeked and soft-voiced, and still small enough to fall asleep against his mother's shoulder, still fully convinced that Margaret could fix anything the world produced. She worked part-time in the medical records department at a county hospital, fitting her hours around school pickups and parent-teacher conferences and doctor appointments and the 10,000 invisible tasks that keep a family running. Daniel worked in commercial insurance and traveled constantly, and somewhere in the accumulation of all those absences, in all those hotel rooms and business dinners in cities Margaret had never visited, he had found someone else. She discovered it not through suspicion or instinct, but through an email notification on the shared family tablet while she was helping Clara label a diagram of the water cycle. She read it once, she read it again. Then she turned the tablet face down, finished the water cycle diagram, and did not speak of it until the children were asleep. They tried counseling. They sat across from a kind woman named Dr. Abrams for 6 weeks and said careful, measured things to each other while Daniel's eyes kept drifting to his phone. They tried silence at the kitchen table after midnight. They tried silence. But there are wounds that go too deep for talking, and Margaret, who had always been honest with herself above all things, understood by February that she was not healing, she was only waiting. She filed for divorce in March, and then she did something she had not expected to need to do. She called her mother. Harold and Beverly Whitmore had lived 20 minutes away in the same 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Drive, where Margaret had grown up. There was a guest room that had held nothing but a sewing machine and old magazines for 3 years. There was a finished basement with a bathroom and a pull-out sofa. There was more than enough room. Margaret knew this the way you know the geography of the house you grew up in, automatically, without having to think about it. She called her mother on a Wednesday evening after the children were in bed and explained everything in a steady voice. The affair, the divorce, the immediate, pressing need for somewhere safe to land while she found her footing. Beverly Whitmore listened. There was a silence that lasted long enough to change temperature. Then her mother said, "Margaret, honey, I just don't think the timing is right for us." Margaret sat with those words for a moment. The timing.
as though her crisis had arrived at an inconvenient hour, as though there were a more convenient season for a woman to lose her marriage and her home at the same time. She thanked her mother and hung up. She did not sleep that night. The next morning, she drove to Sycamore Drive anyway. She told herself that some things were different in person, that seeing her face and her children's faces would move something in her parents that a phone call could not. She parked in the driveway where she had learned to ride a bicycle. She walked up the porch steps she had climbed 10,000 times. Her father, Harold, opened the door before she could knock. He was wearing his weekend sweater, the brown one with the collar she had given him for Christmas 6 years ago, and the expression on his face told her everything before he said a single word. He told her that he and Beverly had talked. He told her they did not think it was the right decision. Margaret looked at him steadily. "Dad," she said, "I have nowhere else to take my children." Harold looked at the ground. He said, "You could still try to work things out with Daniel." And Margaret understood then, not with anger, not yet, but with a profound and clarifying sadness, that her father was not a cruel man. He was simply a man who had never developed the muscle for hard things and had no intention of beginning now. She said, "I'm not going back." He said, "I'm sorry," and she believed him. But sorry did not move the sewing machine out of the guest room. As she turned to leave, her brother Kevin appeared in the hallway behind their father. Kevin was 34 and had lived in this house his entire adult life, occupying the upper floor with the comfortable entirement of a man who had never been asked to inconvenience himself to anyone. He looked at Margaret with a smirk that she would remember for the rest of her life. "You always made everything complicated, Maggie," he said, and laughed. A short, easy, unbothered laugh. Her sister Diane appeared at the bottom of the stairs with her arms folded, married 18 months and already fluent in the language of people who have not yet been tested by anything real. "You're letting your emotions make your decisions. You need to think about the stability of those children." Margaret looked at her sister. She thought, about 12 years of school lunches packed and fevers managed and nightmares soothed and birthday cakes baked and permission slips signed, all of it done quietly and without ceremony, all of it entirely invisible to the people now standing in this hallway explaining her emotions to her. She did not say any of this. She picked up her purse, she walked down the porch steps, she crossed the frozen front lawn to the minivan, where Clara was watching her through the window with dark, understanding eyes, where Rosie was explaining something elaborate to Thomas, where her whole life sat bundled in garbage bags in the back seat. She started the engine, she pulled out of the driveway on Sycamore Drive for the last time, and she drove. The first night they stayed at a budget motel off Route 9 that smelled like industrial cleaner and had a heater that clicked and rattled but worked. Rosie announced within 4 minutes that it was the best bed she had ever encountered in her life. Thomas fell asleep so quickly and so completely that Margaret stood over him for a moment, just watching his chest rise and fall. This small boy who trusted the world entirely because he trusted her. Clara sat beside her mother on the edge of the second bed and was quiet for a long time in the particular way she was quiet when she was working something out. Then she said, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Margaret put her arm around her oldest child. She thought about $73 and 2 garbage bags and a motel room off Route 9. She thought about the smirk on Kevin's and the folded arms of her sister and her father's eyes fixed on the floor. She thought about who she was and what she was made of and every hard thing she had already survived before this one. "Yes," she said, with complete conviction, "we are going to be more than okay." Clara leaned into her, and Margaret held her daughter in that humming, clicking motel room and made herself a promise in the silence. Not a promise of anger, not a promise of revenge, simply a promise of motion. Watch what I build. The months that followed required everything she had. There were evenings when Margaret served the children full plates and told them she had eaten earlier, and she had not. There were mornings when she sat in the hospital parking lot before her shift with her hands on the steering wheel and talked herself through despair with the same patient firmness she used for Rosie's worst tantrums, acknowledging it, refusing to be ruled by it, moving anyway. She applied for every opportunity that appeared. She researched housing assistance programs at 2 a.m. She called in every professional favor she had ever been owed. 3 months after the night on Route 9, her supervisor, Patricia, called her into the office, closed the door, and offered her a full-time position with benefits and a salary that made the parking lot mornings feel like they had been worth every second. Margaret accepted before Patricia finished asking. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on Morrison Avenue, above a hardware store, with low ceilings and kitchen cabinets that stuck and a radiator that cleared its throat every morning at 6, like an old man with opinions. On the first Saturday, Margaret bought 2 gallons of paint from the hardware store downstairs, and they spent the afternoon transforming those walls, Rosie painting with an enthusiasm of someone who had no concern whatsoever for staying.
Within a reasonable area, Thomas supervising from a nest of drop cloths, Clara reading aloud from a novel because she had decided that painting was more meaningful with literary accompaniment. Margaret stood in the middle of that small, loud, paint-splattered living room and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for months. This was theirs. No one had given it to them. No one could take it. The divorce took 8 months, and Daniel's attorneys made every one of those months difficult. They challenged the asset division. They challenged the custody arrangement. They challenged everything with the practiced efficiency of people paid to be obstacles. But courts read documents, and documents record truth. Medical appointment records, every one attended by Margaret. School enrollment forms, signed by Margaret. Daycare check-in logs going back 4 years. Emergency contact lists where Daniel's name appeared second, then third, then not at all. The paperwork told the story of who had actually been raising these children, without editorializing, without emotion, with the clean and irrefutable authority of recorded fact. The judge awarded Margaret primary custody. Child support was ordered. She drove home from the courthouse alone, parked on Morrison Avenue, and sat in the van for exactly 5 minutes. Then she went upstairs and made spaghetti, and helped Thomas with his bath, and listened to Rosie's detailed account of everything that had occurred at school that day, and talked with Clara about the book she was reading, and felt, in the ordinary, sacred rhythm of that evening, that she had won something far larger than a legal ruling. Her mother began calling again that autumn. Beverly Whitmore called with the warm and slightly bewildered energy of a woman who believes that time has resolved what time has not, in fact, touched. She said things like, "We're just so relieved it all worked out," and "Family is everything, you know that," with a sincerity that Margaret believed was genuine, which somehow made it harder rather than easier. Margaret was always pleasant. She was never dishonest, but she had learned in the furnace of the last several months that pleasantness and openness are not the same thing, and that some doors, once they have been closed on you, you are entitled to control the reopening of yourself. Diane's letter arrived in November. It was long and carefully written and full of the right words: regret, accountability, love. Margaret read it twice. She wrote back a short, kind reply that said she had received it, that she appreciated it, and that she was not ready yet. She mailed it without ceremony. She felt afterward not bitter, but simply accurate. Accuracy was the gift the hard months had given her, about people, about herself, about what she would and would not carry going forward. The promotion came in month 14, department supervisor. The raise was not dramatic, but it was meaningful, and it meant a 3-bedroom apartment on Birchfield Lane with a small backyard where Thomas immediately established himself as the permanent director of outdoor operations. Clara arranged her books over an entire weekend with the focused satisfaction of a Someone finally given the right amount of space. Rosie covered her wall in drawings within 48 hours and declared her room an art gallery. Admission free, but appointments preferred. On the first evening in that apartment, Margaret stood alone in the kitchen after the children were in bed, the radio playing softly, dinner cleaned up, the house quiet in the particular full way that a house is quiet when it contains sleeping children. She stood there for a long time, doing nothing, just standing, feeling the specific texture of a piece that had not been given to her but built brick by brick out of every hard morning and every late night and every moment she had chosen motion over surrender. It was the best thing she had ever felt in her life. Clara came to her one evening shortly after, the way she sometimes did, quietly, standing beside her at the kitchen sink, working something out before she spoke. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about Grandpa Harold and Grandma Beverly and Kevin and Diane." Margaret turned off the water. She dried her hands. She waited. "I think they were scared," Clara said. "I think hard things scared them, and they picked easy instead. And I think that's the saddest kind of person. Not mean, just scared." Margaret looked at her daughter for a moment without speaking. Then Clara said, "I'm glad you didn't do that. I'm glad you picked hard, because, Mom, look at us. Look at what you built." Margaret turned back to the sink so that Clara would not see her face. Not from sadness, from the particular overwhelming fullness that comes when love exceeds what your expression can contain. The school hosted its annual family showcase in January, 14 months to the week from the night on Route 9. Clara's project was on resilience, its definition, its origins, how it operates in the human spirit under pressure. She had researched and written and illustrated every panel herself. Margaret walked through the gymnasium of Roosevelt Elementary, surrounded by other families and the smell of cafeteria coffee and the noise of 100 conversations, and came to a stop in front of her daughter's display board. At the bottom, in Clara's careful, deliberate handwriting, was a single sentence. "The strongest people I know didn't stop when the door closed on them. They found another door and walked through it like they had always belonged there." Margaret stood in front of those words until they blurred. Then she looked at her daughter standing beside that board, steady, certain, proud in the quiet way that is more powerful than any loud pride, and understood completely. Clara had not chosen that topic from a textbook. She had chosen it from her life. She had been watching her mother every single day, and what she saw was this: a woman who chose hard over easy, motion over stillness, forward over back, building over waiting, and she had called it resilience. And she was right. If you are standing outside a closed door right now, a door shut by someone who should have opened it, someone who chose their comfort over your survival, please hear what Margaret's story is saying to you. The door was never the destination. What they refused to give you, you are capable of building yourself. What they said you couldn't survive, you are already surviving. The life that waits on the other side of your hardest season is not smaller for what you have lost. For people who refuse to stop moving, it becomes more fully and completely their own than anything that was handed to them ever could have been. You are not finished, you are just beginning. If this story found you at the right moment, if you heard yourself somewhere in Margaret's journey, please subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. Every week, we bring you stories about ordinary people carrying extraordinary courage, quiet strength, unwitnessed sacrifice, and the remarkable human capacity to build something beautiful out of the hardest raw materials life provides. Subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave us a comment telling us about a moment when you chose to keep going. We read every single one. You belong in this family. It honestly portrays the experience of family estrangement during personal crisis, something millions of Americans have lived but rarely see reflected with dignity and accuracy.
It demonstrates that resilience is not a personality trait people are born with, but a daily practice of choosing motion over surrender. It shows children learning who they are by watching who their parents are under real pressure. Clara's project is evidence that our children are always studying us, especially in our hardest moments. It speaks with respect and honesty to the experience of single mothers who carry families without recognition or applause. And it draws a clear, gentle distinction between people who choose comfortable over courageous and those who choose hard over easy, and what each of those choices ultimately produces in a human life.